Hello and welcome. Today, I want to share a story that's deeply personal one about regret, healing, and ultimately, forgiveness. It's a journey that many of us silently walk. One filled with choices we wish we could undo, moments we carry for years, and truths we're often too afraid to face. But sometimes, in the quietest places like an old attic, we find the courage to begin again. This is my story. I forgave myself for not knowing better back then. Let's begin. The attic was a mausoleum of forgotten dreams and unspoken regrets. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight piercing through a crack in the boarded-up window, illuminating forgotten toys, moth-eaten clothes, and the ghosts of choices past. It was here, surrounded by the remnants of my childhood, that I had come to confront the hardest truth of my life. I had to forgive myself for not knowing better back then. My name is Eleanor, and I am, or rather, I was, a physician. A highly respected one at that. Chief of cardiology at St. Jude's, recipient of numerous awards, a speaker at prestigious medical conferences. My life, from the outside, was the epitome of success. But inside, I was a crumbling edifice, haunted by the echoes of a past I had desperately tried to outrun. It all started with my parents. Not in a dramatic, overtly abusive way. No, their methods were far more insidious, a constant, unwavering pressure to succeed, to excel, to be nothing less than perfect. My father, a renowned physicist, expected nothing less than brilliance. My mother, a celebrated concert pianist, demanded artistry and grace. I was to be the perfect synthesis of their talents, a prodigy who would eclipse them both. My childhood was a carefully curated performance. Piano lessons before breakfast, advanced mathematics tutorials after school, science projects that won regional awards. There was little time for play, for friends, for the simple joys of being a child. My worth was measured solely by my accomplishments, by the accolades I received. A B+ was not just a disappointment. It was a personal failure, a betrayal of my parents' expectations. The pressure was relentless, a constant weight on my chest. I yearned to be seen, not just for what I could achieve, but for who I was. I wanted to paint, to write poetry, to explore the woods behind our house without the fear of falling behind on my studies. But those desires were dismissed as frivolous, as distractions from my true purpose, to become someone extraordinary. In high school, I discovered biology. It was a revelation, a world of intricate systems and interconnected processes that fascinated me. For the first time, I felt a genuine passion, a sense of purpose that wasn't dictated by my parents. I excelled in my science classes, devouring textbooks and conducting experiments with a fervor I had never felt before. But even then, the pressure to be perfect persisted. I pushed myself relentlessly, sacrificing sleep, neglecting my health, all in pursuit of academic excellence. I was driven by a desperate need for approval, a belief that only by achieving greatness could I earn my parents' love. When it came time to apply to college, there was only one option in my parents' minds: Harvard. And not just any program, but the pre-med track. Anything less would be a waste of my potential, a betrayal of their sacrifices. I wanted to study art history. I secretly dreamed of becoming a curator, of immersing myself in the beauty and history of the world's greatest masterpieces. But I knew that voicing those desires would be futile. My parents had invested too much in my future, in their vision of my success. So, I dutifully applied to Harvard pre-med and was accepted. The acceptance letter was met with triumphant smiles and effusive praise. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, a sense of loss for the life I would never lead. College was a blur of grueling coursework, endless studying, and a constant sense of inadequacy. I was surrounded by brilliant, driven students, all vying for the top spot. The competition was fierce, the pressure immense. I felt like I was drowning, struggling to stay afloat in a sea of expectations. It was during my second year that I met Daniel. He was an art student, a free spirit who saw the world through a different lens. He was kind, compassionate, and he saw me not just as a future doctor, but as a person with her own hopes, dreams, and fears. Daniel introduced me to a world I had only glimpsed before: art galleries, poetry slams, late-night discussions about philosophy and life. He encouraged me to explore my creative side, to paint, to write, to express myself without fear of judgment. For the first time, I felt truly alive. We fell deeply in love. He was my sanctuary, my escape from the relentless pressure of my academic life. With him, I could be myself, without pretense or expectation. But our happiness was short-lived. My parents disapproved of Daniel. They saw him as a distraction, a threat to my future. They warned me that he would hold me back, that he was not good enough for me. Their disapproval weighed heavily on me. I loved Daniel, but I also craved my parents' approval. I was torn between my heart and my duty, between my happiness and their expectations. The pressure mounted until I could no longer bear it. I started having panic attacks, experiencing debilitating anxiety. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on my studies. I was crumbling under the weight of my own expectations and the expectations of my parents. One night, after a particularly brutal argument with my parents about Daniel, I made a decision. A decision that would haunt me for years to come. I broke up with him. The pain of that breakup was excruciating. I felt like I had ripped out my own heart. But I convinced myself that it was for the best, that I was sacrificing my happiness for the sake of my future. I threw myself back into my studies, determined to prove to my parents that I had made the right choice. I excelled in my classes, graduated with honors, and was accepted into a prestigious medical school. My parents were overjoyed. They praised my dedication, my ambition, my success. But their approval felt hollow, meaningless. I had achieved everything they had wanted for me, but I was deeply unhappy. Medical school was even more demanding than college. The hours were long, the stress was intense, and the emotional toll was immense. I witnessed suffering and death on a daily basis, and I struggled to cope with the weight of responsibility. I became increasingly detached, emotionally numb. I threw myself into my work, using it as a shield against my own pain. I became a highly skilled physician, but I lost touch with my own humanity. Years passed. I climbed the ranks of the medical profession, achieving success and recognition. I married a fellow doctor, a man who was as driven and ambitious as I was. We had a beautiful house, a comfortable life, and a seemingly perfect marriage. But beneath the surface, I was still haunted by the past. The memory of Daniel, the pain of our breakup, the sacrifices I had made in pursuit of my parents' approval, they all lingered, unresolved. One day I received a letter. It was from Daniel. He was getting married, and he wanted me to know. He wrote about his happiness, his love for his future wife, his gratitude for the lessons he had learned in life. Reading that letter was like a punch to the gut. I realized that I had made a terrible mistake. I had sacrificed my own happiness for the sake of my parents' expectations, and I had ended up with a life that was empty and unfulfilling. I started to question everything. My career, my marriage, my entire life. I realized that I had been living a lie, a life that was not my own. I decided to make a change. I started therapy, seeking help to deal with my past and to find a way to live a more authentic life. It was a long and difficult process, but it was also incredibly liberating. I started to explore my creative side again. I took painting classes, joined a writing group, and started to reconnect with the parts of myself that I had abandoned years ago. I also started to confront my parents. It was a difficult conversation, filled with anger, resentment, and pain. But it was also necessary. I told them how their expectations had shaped my life, how their disapproval had driven me to make choices that were not my own. To my surprise, they listened. They admitted that they had been too demanding, too focused on my achievements. They apologized for the pain they had caused me. It was not a magical reconciliation. Our relationship was still strained, but it was a start. We began to communicate more openly, to understand each other better. I also realized that I needed to forgive myself. For forgiving my parents and ultimately myself, I had to understand that they did the best that they could, and that I had done the best that I could with the knowledge and understanding that I had at the time. Back in the attic, surrounded by the ghosts of my past, I finally understood. I had been holding on to the pain of my past for too long. I had been blaming myself for not knowing better, for not being stronger, for not standing up to my parents. But I realized that I was just a child, doing the best I could in a difficult situation. I had to forgive myself for the choices I had made, for the mistakes I had committed. I had to accept that I couldn't change the past, but I could learn from it. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I imagined myself as a child, standing in that same attic, feeling lost and alone. I reached out to her, offering her comfort and compassion. "It's okay," I whispered. "You did the best you could. I forgive you." A wave of emotion washed over me. Tears streamed down my face. But they were not tears of pain, but tears of release, of healing, of forgiveness. I opened my eyes and looked around the attic. The dust motes still danced in the sunlight, but they no longer seemed menacing. They seemed to be celebrating, rejoicing in my newfound freedom. I left the attic feeling lighter, freer than I had felt in years. I had finally forgiven myself for not knowing better back then. And in doing so, I had opened the door to a future filled with hope, healing, and self-acceptance. The journey wasn't over. I still had work to do, wounds to heal. But I knew that I was on the right path, a path that would lead me to a life of authenticity, purpose, and joy. I had spent so long trying to outrun my past, but now I understood that the only way to truly move forward was to face it, to embrace it, and to forgive myself for all the things I didn't know back then. My marriage ended, not in bitterness, but in a mutual understanding that we were not right for each other. We remained friends, supportive of each other's journeys. I continued to practice medicine, but with a renewed sense of compassion and empathy. I became an advocate for mental health, sharing my story with others and encouraging them to seek help. And yes, I even reconnected with Daniel. He was happily married with children, but we were able to forge a new friendship, one built on mutual respect and understanding. We often laughed about the past, about the choices we had made, about the lessons we had learned. One day, Daniel asked me if I regretted anything. I thought about it for a moment, then smiled. "I used to," I said. "But now I realize that everything that happened, even the painful things, led me to where I am today. And I wouldn't trade that for anything." He smiled back. "Me neither," he said. And in that moment, I knew that I had truly healed. I had forgiven myself, I had forgiven my parents, and I had forgiven life for all its challenges and heartaches. I was finally free to be myself, to live my life on my own terms, to embrace the future with open arms. The attic remained a place of reflection, a reminder of the journey I had taken, but it was no longer a mausoleum of regrets. It was a sanctuary of self-acceptance, a testament to the power of forgiveness, and a beacon of hope for the future. The human heart is resilient, capable of healing even the deepest wounds. But it requires courage, compassion, and a willingness to forgive, not just others, but also ourselves. For in the end, the greatest act of love is the love we give to ourselves. This love gives us the courage to begin again and forgive our ignorance that has held us back for so long. The weight we carried from not knowing weighed us down and made our life difficult. Only once we laid down the burdens could we truly find peace. It took me many years to learn this lesson, but it was a lesson worth learning. And I hope that by sharing my story, I can inspire others to embark on their own journeys of healing and self-discovery. The journey is long but worth it in the end to reach ultimate peace and the understanding of the situation. Thank you, truly, for listening to my story. If any part of it resonated with you, I want you to remember this. You are not alone. We've all carried the weight of things we didn't know, mistakes we made when we were simply doing our best. But healing begins the moment we choose to forgive ourselves. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to take a quiet moment today. Speak gently to your younger self. And maybe, just maybe, say the words you've been needing to hear. I forgive you. Don't forget to like, share, or leave a comment if this story spoke to you. And if you're on your own journey of healing, I see you. I honor your courage. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take one small step toward peace.